Picture this: a castle perched on a cliff, shrouded in mist. Below, in the courtyard, 20,000 wooden stakes pierce the sky like a forest of death. Impaled on each one is a human body, men, women, children, left to rot in the sun as a warning to anyone who dares oppose the castle's master. This isn't a scene from a horror movie. This actually happened, and the man responsible for this nightmare wasn't a fictional vampire. He was real. His name was Vlad Dracula, and his thirst for blood was far more terrifying than any creature of the night Hollywood could ever imagine. But here's the question that will haunt you. How did a medieval prince who ruled for barely 6 years become the most feared monster in human history? Tonight, we're going to uncover the shocking truth behind the real Dracula, and you might discover that the man was far more terrifying than the myth. The year is 1431. In the shadow of the Carpathian Mountains, in a region that would later become Romania, a child is born into a world of violence and betrayal. His father, Vlad II, rules the Principality of Wallachia, a small but strategically important land caught between two massive empires, the Christian Kingdom of Hungary to the north, and the Islamic Ottoman Empire to the south. The boy's name is Vlad III, but he would earn a different title, one that would echo through centuries of nightmares: Vlad Dracula. Dracula literally means son of the dragon, referring to his father's membership in the Order of the Dragon, a secret society dedicated to fighting the Ottoman Turks. But young Vlad's childhood is about to take a turn that would shape him into the monster he would become. When he's just 11 years old, something unthinkable happens. His own father hands him over to the enemy. In 1442, Vlad II makes a deal with the Ottoman Sultan. To secure peace and his own throne, he offers his 2 youngest sons as hostages, human collateral to ensure his loyalty. Imagine being 11 years old and watching your father essentially sell you to the people you've been taught to hate and fear. Vlad and his younger brother Radu are taken to the Ottoman court in Adrianople, hundreds of miles from home. Here, in this foreign land, surrounded by a different culture, a different religion, and constant threats, Vlad spends 6 formative years of his life. The Ottomans aren't cruel to their hostages. They're strategic. They educate them, train them in warfare, and attempt to convert them to Islam. Young princes like Vlad are meant to become loyal vassals who will one day rule their homelands in service to the Sultan. But something goes wrong with this plan. While his brother Radu adapts and even thrives in Ottoman society, eventually converting to Islam and becoming known as Radu the Handsome, Vlad resists. The experience doesn't make him loyal. It fills him with a rage that will burn for the rest of his life. During these years, Vlad witnesses something that most historians believe planted the first seeds of his future brutality: the Ottoman practice of impalement. This wasn't just an execution method. It was a form of psychological warfare designed to terrify enemies into submission. The victim would be slowly pierced through with a wooden stake, positioned so that their own body weight would gradually drive the stake deeper, prolonging their agony for hours or even days. Young Vlad watches, he learns, and he remembers. In 1448, 17-year-old Vlad gets his first taste of real power. With Ottoman backing, he's placed on the throne of Wallachia after his father is assassinated by Hungarian nobles. But this first reign lasts only 2 months before he's driven out by the very people he's supposed to rule. Here's where Vlad's story becomes even more fascinating and tragic. For the next 8 years, he's essentially a prince without a kingdom, an exile plotting his return. He spends time at the court of his father's killer, learning diplomacy and warfare. he studies his enemies, both Ottoman and Hungarian, understanding their strengths and weaknesses. During this period, something fundamental changes in Vlad. The scared boy who was handed over as a hostage transforms into a calculated, ruthless strategist. He realizes that in his position, ruling a small country caught between two empires, conventional warfare and diplomacy won't work. He needs something else. Something that will make his enemies too terrified to oppose him. He needs fear. In 1456, Vlad finally gets his chance for revenge and redemption. The man who killed his father, John Hunyadi, dies of plague after a victory against the Ottomans. With Hunyadi gone and political chaos in Hungary, Vlad sees his opportunity. With a small force, he marches into Wallachia and reclaims his throne. This time, he's determined to keep it. But Vlad faces an immediate problem. His boyars, the wealthy nobles who actually run the country, don't respect him. They see him as an Ottoman puppet, a young upstart who doesn't deserve their loyalty. Many of them were involved in his father's assassination and his own earlier overthrow. Vlad's response is swift and shocking. He doesn't try to win them over with political maneuvering or generous gifts. Instead, he invites them all to a grand Easter feast in 1457. Picture the scene. Hundreds of noble families dressed in their finest clothes, gathering in the great hall of his castle for what they think is a celebration. Instead, it becomes a massacre. Vlad's soldiers surround the hall. The older boyars are immediately impaled on stakes outside the castle walls. But here's the truly chilling part. Vlad doesn't kill the younger nobles. Instead, he forces them to march 50 miles through the mountains to rebuild an abandoned fortress that will become his new stronghold, Castle Dracula. Many die during this forced march. Those who survive spend months rebuilding the castle stone by stone, their fine clothes turning to rags, their soft hands becoming bloody and calloused. It's a masterpiece of psychological warfare. He doesn't just eliminate his enemies, he humiliates them and makes them build the very fortress that will become the symbol of his power. This is the moment Vlad truly becomes the Impaler. But it's only the beginning. What happens next defies imagination, even by medieval standards. Vlad begins implementing a reign of terror, so systematic and brutal that it makes other medieval tyrants look like amateurs. But here's what's truly disturbing. It's not random violence. Every act of brutality serves a calculated purpose. Vlad's preferred method of execution becomes impalement, but he doesn't just use it as punishment. He turns it into an art form of horror. He experiments with different techniques, different angles, different types of stakes. Some victims are impaled through the heart for a quick death. These are the ones he considers deserving of mercy. Others are positioned so the stake misses vital organs, prolonging their agony for days. But it's not just the method that makes Vlad unique, it's the scale. Contemporary accounts, written by both enemies and allies, describe scenes that sound like something from Dante's Inferno. Outside the city of Târgoviște, Vlad creates what becomes known as the Forest of the Impaled. Thousands of stakes arranged in geometric patterns, each topped with a decomposing corpse. Foreign ambassadors report that the smell can be detected from miles away. Birds won't fly over the area. Even Vlad's own soldiers struggle to approach without vomiting. One German pamphlet from the time describes Vlad dining among the impaled victims, apparently unfazed by the stench of death surrounding him. Whether this specific incident is true or propaganda, it illustrates how Vlad's reputation for brutality had already spread across Europe. But here's what makes Vlad's story even more complex. He doesn't just target his enemies. He seems driven by a twisted sense of justice that recognizes no social boundaries. Merchants who cheat their customers, wives who are unfaithful to their husbands, priests who break their vows, all face the same fate. There's a famous story, possibly apocryphal but revealing nonetheless, about a golden cup that Vlad places at a public fountain in Targovishte. The cup is for travelers to drink from, and despite being made of gold, it's never stolen. Not because people are naturally honest, but because everyone knows that theft means impalement. Vlad's methods extend beyond impalement. He's reported to have people skinned alive, boiled in oil, and subjected to other tortures that medieval chroniclers struggle to describe. But impalement remains his signature. It becomes so associated with him that even his supporters begin calling him Vlad Tepes, literally Vlad the Impaler. The question that haunts historians is, why? What drives a man to such extremes? Some argue it's pure sadism, that his childhood trauma broke something fundamental in his psyche. Others suggest it's coldly strategic, that Wallachia's position required such extreme measures to maintain independence. But there might be a third explanation, one that's even more disturbing. What if Vlad genuinely believed he was serving justice? Medieval sources describe him as deeply religious, attending church regularly, and making generous donations to monasteries. He sees himself not as a monster, but as God's instrument of justice in a corrupt world. This religious dimension makes his story even more chilling. This isn't a man who's simply evil. This is someone who's convinced that his horrific actions are righteous. By 1459, Vlad has consolidated power in Wallachia through terror, but he faces his greatest challenge yet. The Ottoman Empire, the same power that held him hostage as a child, demands tribute and submission. Sultan Mehmed II, fresh from his conquest of Constantinople, expects Wallachia to pay taxes and provide troops for Ottoman campaigns. Vlad's response is characteristically brutal and brilliant. Instead of simply refusing to pay tribute, he lures the Ottoman tax collectors into a trap. When they arrive at his court demanding payment, Vlad has them seized. Their turbans are nailed to their heads because, he claims, they refuse to remove them in his presence as a sign of respect. This isn't just a rejection of Ottoman authority. It's a declaration of war against the most powerful empire in the world. What follows is one of the most asymmetric conflicts in medieval history. Vlad, commanding perhaps 30,000 men, faces an Ottoman Empire with virtually unlimited resources. Conventional wisdom says Wallachia should be crushed within months. Instead, Vlad launches a campaign that will be studied by military historians for centuries. He doesn't try to meet the Ottomans in open battle. That would be suicide. Instead, he implements what we would now recognize as guerrilla warfare, combined with psychological operations that are centuries ahead of their time. Vlad's forces strike Ottoman camps at night, always targeting officers and leaving common soldiers alive to spread terror. They poison wells, burn crops, and destroy bridges, turning the landscape into a wasteland that can't support a large army. But most importantly, they leave their signature everywhere they go, forests of impaled Ottoman soldiers marking their path. The psychological impact is devastating. Ottoman soldiers, who have conquered most of the known world, find themselves terrified of a relatively small force. They're not just fighting an army, they're fighting their own nightmares. One of the most famous incidents occurs in 1462, when Sultan Mehmed II himself leads a massive army into Wallachia. Contemporary sources put the Ottoman force at over 90,000 men, 3 times larger than Vlad's entire population. As the Ottoman army approaches Targoviste, they encounter something that stops them in their tracks. Vlad has created his masterpiece of psychological warfare, a forest of 20,000 impaled Ottoman prisoners, arranged in perfect rows, stretching for miles. The bodies are in various stages of decomposition, creating a landscape of death that defies description. Sultan Mehmed II, a man who has seen the worst of medieval warfare, is reportedly so shaken by this sight that he orders his army to retreat. One of his chroniclers writes that even the Sultan, a man of strong heart, was disturbed by what he saw. But Vlad isn't finished. On the night of June 17, 1462, he launches what becomes known as the Night Attack, one of the most audacious military operations in medieval history. With just a few thousand men, Vlad infiltrates the Ottoman camp, targeting the Sultan's tent specifically. The attack nearly succeeds. Vlad's forces cut through the Ottoman lines, creating chaos in the massive camp. In the darkness and confusion, Ottoman soldiers begin fighting each other. Although the night attack ultimately fails to kill Mehmed II, it achieves something arguably more valuable. It proves that the seemingly invincible Ottoman Empire can be hurt. Word of Vlad's resistance spreads across Europe, where Christian kingdoms have been watching Ottoman expansion with growing terror. For a brief moment, Vlad becomes a hero to Christian Europe. The Pope himself praises Vlad as a defender of the faith. Hungarian King Matthias Corvinus, despite his complicated relationship with Vlad, recognizes the strategic value of supporting him. But this support comes with a price. European powers want Vlad to continue his war against the Ottomans, but they don't want to provide the substantial military aid he needs to actually win. They're content to let Wallachia serve as a buffer state, absorbing Ottoman attacks while they remain safely behind their borders. This abandonment by his supposed allies will prove crucial to Vlad's ultimate downfall. But even in defeat, his legend continues to grow. Here's where the story takes a fascinating turn that helps explain how Vlad the Impaler eventually became Dracula the vampire. Even during his lifetime, Vlad becomes the subject of what might be history's first international propaganda campaign. The printing press has recently been invented, and German merchants begin producing pamphlets about Vlad's atrocities. These aren't objective historical accounts. They're sensationalized horror stories designed to sell copies and demonize an enemy of Christendom. But here's the twist. Vlad is supposed to be on the same side as these German Christians. So why are they portraying him as a monster? The answer lies in medieval politics and economics. Vlad's war against corruption extends to foreign merchants who he believes are exploiting his people. German and Saxon traders who have grown wealthy through special privileges find themselves facing the same brutal justice as everyone else. When these merchants flee Wallachia, they carry with them stories of Vlad's brutality, but they don't present themselves as profiteers who were caught cheating. They portray themselves as innocent Christians persecuted by a madman. The pamphlets they commission are masterpieces of propaganda. They describe Vlad's cruelty in lurid detail, often exaggerating real events or inventing new atrocities entirely. One pamphlet claims Vlad forced mothers to eat their own children. Another describes him washing his hands in the blood of his victims. These stories spread rapidly across Europe, copied and embellished with each retelling. Woodcut illustrations show Vlad dining among forests of impaled victims, his face twisted with demonic pleasure. The images are so powerful and disturbing that they burn themselves into European consciousness. But the most important detail in these propaganda pieces is often overlooked. They consistently refer to Vlad as Dracula. To German readers, unfamiliar with the Order of the Dragon, this sounds less like a title and more like a demonic name. Meanwhile, Vlad faces a more immediate propaganda war. After his night attack fails to kill Sultan Mehmed II, the Ottoman Empire launches its own campaign to discredit him. They support his brother Radu the Handsome, as a rival claimant to the Wallachian throne. This creates a devastating psychological blow for Vlad. The brother who shared his childhood captivity, who should understand better than anyone what the Ottomans did to them, has chosen to serve the enemy. Radu doesn't just convert to Islam. He actively campaigns against his own brother, using Ottoman resources to claim Wallachia for himself. The civil war that follows is particularly brutal, even by Vlad's standards. It's not just a political conflict, it's a personal betrayal that cuts to the core of everything Vlad believes about loyalty and family. Hungarian King Matthias Corvinus, who has been receiving papal funds to support Vlad's anti-Ottoman campaign, sees an opportunity. Instead of using this money to help Vlad, he decides to remove an inconvenient ally who has become more liability than asset. In 1462, Matthias has Vlad arrested on charges of treason and correspondence with the Ottomans. The irony is breathtaking. Vlad, who has spent years fighting the Ottoman Empire, is imprisoned by his supposed Christian ally on charges of collaborating with the very enemy he's been battling. But Matthias faces a problem. He can't simply execute Vlad without angering the Pope, who still sees the Impaler as a crusader against Islam. Instead, Vlad is imprisoned in Visegrad Castle, where he remains for nearly 12 years. During this imprisonment, the propaganda war continues. Hungarian chroniclers begin adding their own stories to the growing legend of Vlad's cruelty. Some of these accounts are clearly fabricated. They describe events that supposedly occurred while Vlad was already in prison. But truth becomes irrelevant. The image of Vlad Dracula as a bloodthirsty monster has taken on a life of its own, spreading across Europe and eventually across centuries. In 1474, after nearly 12 years in prison, Vlad is released. The political situation has changed dramatically. The Ottoman Empire is pushing deeper into Europe, and Hungary needs every ally it can get against the Islamic advance. Vlad, now in his 40s, is a changed man. Prison has aged him, but it hasn't broken his spirit. If anything, his years of captivity have intensified his hatred for those he sees as traitors and enemies. He returns to Wallachia for a third and final reign, but the country he reclaims is not the one he left. His brother Radu has died, but Ottoman influence remains strong. Many of his former subjects have grown accustomed to Ottoman rule and see Vlad's return as an unwelcome disruption. This final period of Vlad's rule is marked by a desperate attempt to recapture his former power through the same methods that worked before: terror and brutality. But the world has changed. His enemies are more organized, his allies less reliable, and his own people war-weary. The end comes quickly and mysteriously. In December 1476, just 2 months after reclaiming his throne, Vlad is killed in battle against Ottoman forces. But the circumstances of his death remain one of history's great mysteries. Some accounts say he died fighting valiantly against overwhelming odds, staying true to his warrior nature to the end. Others suggest he was assassinated by his own men, who had grown tired of his brutality and feared Ottoman retaliation. The most intriguing theory, supported by some modern historians, is that Vlad was killed not by enemy soldiers, but by Wallachian boyars who saw his death as the only way to secure peace with the Ottoman Empire. If true, it means that the man who spent his life fighting betrayal was ultimately betrayed by his own people. His head is cut off and sent to Constantinople, where Sultan Mehmed II reportedly displays it as proof that the infamous Impaler is finally dead. His body is supposedly buried at Snagov Monastery. But when archaeologists opened the tomb in the 20th century, they found it empty. Even in death, Vlad Dracula remains a mystery. But here's what makes his story truly haunting. Within decades of his death, the propaganda pamphlets about his cruelty begin transforming into something else entirely. The historical Vlad gradually morphs into a legendary figure of supernatural evil. Medieval chroniclers begin attributing demonic powers to him. Stories emerge that he made pacts with the devil, that he couldn't be killed by conventional means, that he rose from the grave to continue his reign of terror. These stories, combined with local folklore about vampires and the undead, create a perfect storm of mythology. The historical prince of Wallachia begins his transformation into the fictional vampire that will eventually dominate popular culture. Fast forward to 1897. An Irish author named Bram Stoker sits in his study in London, working on a gothic horror novel. He needs a name for his vampire antagonist, and he's been researching Eastern European folklore and history. Stoker has read the medieval pamphlets about Vlad Dracula. He's fascinated by the stories of cruelty and bloodlust, but he's also intrigued by something else: the name itself. Dracula sounds suitably foreign and menacing to Victorian English ears. But Stoker makes a crucial change. He moves his vampire from Wallachia to Transylvania, a region that was never actually ruled by the historical Vlad. This geographic shift, probably made for dramatic effect, creates centuries of confusion between the real prince and the fictional monster. Stoker's Dracula borrows elements from the historical Vlad, the Romanian setting, the connection to blood, the aristocratic background, but transforms him into something entirely different. The brutal but mortal prince becomes an immortal creature of supernatural evil. The novel's success ensures that Dracula becomes synonymous with vampirism in popular culture. But in doing so, it also ensures that the historical Vlad III becomes increasingly obscured by his fictional counterpart. This transformation reveals something fascinating about how legends evolve. The real Vlad was terrifying enough that medieval people could easily believe he possessed supernatural powers. His cruelty was so extreme that it seemed to transcend human limitations. In a sense, the vampire myth captures something true about the historical Vlad. He was indeed a man whose thirst for blood and capacity for cruelty seemed to go beyond normal human boundaries. The supernatural elements are fiction, but the underlying horror is grounded in historical reality. Modern Romania has a complicated relationship with this legacy. On one hand, Vlad is celebrated as a national hero who defended Romanian independence against foreign invaders. Statues and monuments honor his memory as a patriotic leader. On the other hand, the vampire connection has turned his homeland into a tourist destination for horror fans seeking the real Dracula's castle. This commercialization often ignores the actual history in favor of Gothic atmosphere and supernatural thrills. The truth is that there is no single Dracula's castle. The historical Vlad ruled from multiple fortresses, none of which match the description in Stoker's novel. Bran Castle, often marketed as Dracula's castle to tourists, has only a tenuous connection to the historical prince. But perhaps this confusion between history and fiction is fitting. Vlad Dracula was, from the very beginning of his legend, a figure who existed as much in the realm of propaganda and storytelling as in historical fact. So what's the truth about Vlad the Impaler? Was he a monster or a hero? A sadistic psychopath or a patriotic defender of his homeland? The answer might be that he was all of these things, and that's what makes his story so endlessly fascinating and disturbing. The historical evidence suggests a man shaped by childhood trauma, political necessity, and genuine religious conviction into something that transcended normal categories of good and evil. His methods were undeniably horrific, but they achieved their strategic goals, for a time at least. What's certain is that Vlad Dracula represents something universal about human nature that both fascinates and terrifies us. He shows how ordinary people can become monsters under the right circumstances, and how the line between justice and cruelty can become impossibly blurred. His transformation from historical figure to fictional vampire reflects our need to make sense of extreme evil by placing it outside the boundaries of normal humanity. It's more comfortable to imagine that such cruelty comes from supernatural monsters than from people like ourselves. But the real Vlad Dracula was human, and that might be the most frightening truth of all. The next time you see a vampire movie or read a gothic novel, remember that behind the fangs and the cape and the supernatural powers, there was once a real man whose capacity for cruelty was so extreme that it seemed to transcend the boundaries of mortality itself. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson of Vlad the Impaler's story, that the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones we imagine, but the ones we create. And sometimes, just sometimes, they're the ones we become. What do you think? Was Vlad Dracula a necessary evil, defending his homeland against impossible odds? Or was he simply a monster who found clever justifications for his cruelty? The answer might reveal more about ourselves than we're comfortable admitting. If this exploration into the dark corridors of history intrigued you, there are countless other stories waiting to be uncovered. Tales of real people whose lives were stranger and more terrifying than any fiction. The past is full of mysteries that continue to haunt our present, and some of them are still waiting to be solved.